So that's the cue to begin. Good evening to everyone in the room, everyone on the Zoom and the Zoom room. So tonight's topic is Rav Soloveitchik on interfaith and interdenominational dialogue, cooperation, conversation, of course, from the perspective of Orthodox Jews, not just individuals, but the Orthodox community, Orthodox rabbinical associations like the RCA. These are two related topics. One has to do with how Rav Soloveitchik felt about the very popular efforts, especially in the middle of the 20th century, towards interfaith dialogue that emerged. We'll talk a little bit about the history of that, emerged out of Vatican II and some of the declarations from the Catholic Church in the 1960s. So on one level, what does Rav Soloveitchik think about the Jewish people in general? Although, of course, those who were asking him this question were exclusively within the Orthodox Jewish community, Orthodox rabbis, dialoguing, conversing, talking with leaders, faith leaders of other religions. And a similar yet very different question is the notion that, of course, Orthodox Judaism is a small, Orthodox Judaism is a small segment, a minority segment of the total Jewish population in America. We're a small percentage. We're a growing percentage now, and sort of thinking about this topic, maybe as an appendix, we'll talk a little bit about what has changed since Rav Soloveitchik's death over 30 years ago, and how that plays into his. It's a fun game that people play. What would the Rav have said had he been alive for fill in the blank, right? It's a fun game to play, but what his position would have been, or whether it would have changed, is completely conjecture. What's not conjecture is the changes in the demographics, in the society, in the culture, in the facts on the ground, which I think is interesting to talk about at the end. We have a long way to go before we get there. But to begin, I would just put out the idea that to really understand this topic, in what ways can Orthodox rabbis, Orthodox organizations dialogue, cooperate with organizations and clergy of other faiths and organizations and rabbis of other denominations. Of course, we're talking conservative and reform. Now there's Reconstructionist. Jews for Jesus clergy were always considered out of the box and that itself is an interesting point, that even as there have been calls for a broadening of the tent of what constitutes being identified a Jewish identity, there are certain things that are red lines, right? And it's interesting, right, that nobody, whether it's the Federation or whether it's a board of rabbis or whether it's any other sort of general Jewish American organization, institution, gathering, no one would include, Jews for Jesus, right? And it's just an interesting point to consider, that there are certain points of agreement across the denominational spectrum, even though in lots of ways we can't agree on lots of things. I'm not going to say we can't agree on much, because I think we can agree on much, but there are certainly things that we don't agree on, and therein lies the question. But the starting point is to understand the Rav's opinions on this and his writings on this, and I give you in the source packet, is to understand, to take religion seriously. In other words, if we're just talking about what was that movie with Gwyneth Paltrow, the rabbi and she had two good friends, the rabbi and the priest, right? You don't remember? Oh, it's like 20 years old. Anyway, right? Well, the rabbi and the priest grew up playing basketball together. They like to go out to dinner together, and they played golf and basketball. Right? If that's what religion is, then who cares? You can socialize with anyone. But if we take religion seriously, then we acknowledge and admit that there can be real, deep, significant, consequential discussions and conversations surrounding religion. So on the one hand, the basis of this whole topic is the fact that we presumably take religion seriously, and therefore we have to think carefully about the extent to which we can and should engage in conversations in a religious manner with people who don't believe it the same way we do. We can respect them, we can help them, we can do all types of things. But can we sit around the table as members of different faith communities and where are the pitfalls, where are some of the challenges? And the very fact that there are challenges is premised upon this idea that that religion is taken seriously. The flip side of that, and that's sort of the paradox, will be that really, in many ways, Rav Soloveitchik felt that everything we do is an expression of our Jewish identity, right? Even the way that we interact in the workplace, the way that we address, social problems, right? The way that we address poverty, the way that we address famine and war and all those big issues or even small issues, right? Is all through a religious prism, which begs the question, as we'll see, Rav Soloveitchik ultimately creates this binary of areas in which there can be interfaith and interdenominational cooperation and areas in which they are off limits. But that begs the question, if our whole existence, our whole identity is wrapped into our religious persona, then really everything we talk about is religion. And that's very much a Torah Umada perspective, that we live integrated lives. It's not that we're Jews in the shul and then outside on the street we're just Hollywood, Florida citizens or American citizens. Everything we do is through the prism of our Torah identity. So as such, what conversations can there be where we can somehow interface and interact and dialogue, communicate with people of a different faith perspective and religion? Does that really work? So it's a fair question, but it all emanates from this given to start with, that there are that religion is taken seriously, that religion is an incredibly powerful force, that religion is a force that is built into humanity as a force, whether you're Jewish or not, right? We have a lot more, I remember almost 20 years ago now, I was invited to be one of the a representative at the RCA as part of this international coordinating council for Catholics and Jews, and it was young clergy, young faith leaders from the Jewish community and the Catholic community. Back then, I was a young faith leader, and so we were talking, and I actually was rooming with a Catholic priest in training, and what was interesting was that in many ways our values, our perspective on life. Of course, his didn't include marriage, and mine certainly did. But in many ways, our vernacular, our conversation had a lot of similarities to it, in ways that the conversations with faith, with clergy, with rabbis, let's say from the non-Orthodox denominations, were there. Obviously, there are ways in which the conservative and reform rabbi and I had a lot more in common. But in other ways, there were things in which the Catholic priest in training and I had a common language, a common understanding, in ways that diverged from some of the non-Orthodox participants in the conference. And so it was just an interesting realization, a reminder that religion as a force, as a power, as an identity marker is something that is not unique, is not only for Jews. It applies to many others, and therein lies some of those faith communities are interested or are even compelled to engage in interfacing and interacting with us. And the question is, are we as comfortable with it as they are? Right? As Rav Soloveitchik points out, the Jewish community is, quote, the community of the few, and the Christian community is the faith community of the many. We are definitely the minority. So that certainly puts us in a certainly vulnerable position, as we are depending on what, and perhaps that's where the sensitivity can come up. That's where the sort of the guidelines emerge. So it was in the really, this is a topic of its own, really a history lecture, but it seems to be in the aftermath of the Holocaust. There was a movement within the Catholic Church to come to some sort of terms, or to recognize the need. Perhaps there was other influences as well in the 1950s and turning into the 60s that compelled them to explore their relationship with other religions. They convened the Vatican II Council. As part of that Vatican II Council, and that's one of the one of the benefits of Catholicism, is that, like, they just gather together, and the Pope says, "Oh, we change the liturgy now." Right, so we used to refer to the Jews on Good Friday as the perfidious Jews, and now we change the language. Who are you to change? I'm the Pope, right? What the Pope says goes, right? So, like, we're a little bit more dogmatic, right? We don't like this bracha, so we're gonna gather together today and take it out. No, we understand that from our perspective, there is deep meaning. Who are we to change the liturgy in such significant ways? But Catholics are not worried by that. They convene the synod. They get all the bishops and the leadership, and with the Pope at the top, and they take advantage of it. Let me just close the door. So it was at this time. So at the end of this, one of the last documents that emerged from that meeting, that Vatican II convocation, whatever they call it, was the Declaration on the Relationship of the Church to Non-Christian Religions. That's the first page of the handout that I gave you. It's two sides. We're not going to read it all together, but it's, it lays out, it points out that this is a response to something that's going on in the moment, the spirit of the moment. In our time, when day by day mankind is being drawn closer together and the ties between different peoples are becoming stronger, the Church examines more closely her relationship to non-Christian religions. In her task of promoting unity and love among men, indeed among nations, she considers above all in this declaration what men have in common and what draws them to fellowship. Interesting, right? Goes on to say, right, that suggests a number of givens within the Catholic faith, right? And that man expect from the various religions answers to the unsolved riddles of the human condition. Today, even as in former times, deeply stirred the hearts of man. What is man? What is the meaning, the aim of our life? What is moral good? What is sin? Right? So, and then therefore the Church exhorts her sons that through dialogue and collaboration with the followers of other religions, carried out with prudence and love, and in witness to the Christian faith and life, they recognize, preserve, and promote the good things, spiritual and moral, as well as socio-cultural values found among these men. Right? So that the Church seems to be encouraging members of their community to engage in dialogue and collaboration around the values, right? These deeply held mysteries of life. What is life? What is sin? What is morality? What is the purpose of life? As well as socio-cultural values, right? The things that I would call, let's say, war and famine and disease and hunger and all those things that are socio-cultural, right? And of course it's framed through Christian faith and life. Right? That reminds me that I still serve as a governor's appointee to the Florida Faith-Based and Community-Based Advisory Council. It meets 4 times a year. It's a group of religious members of the faith community, not just rabbis and priests, but also people at the head of like Catholic charities and things like that. And we meet and we advise the governor's office on ways in which the the nonprofit but faith-based community can collaborate with the government to, right, because government doesn't have all the answers, but government has some resources that individual organizations, charities, nonprofits don't have, so that the collaboration can certainly elevate and heighten the impact. That's a very interesting thing. I said rabbis, I'm being generous. It's just me. I'm the only Jewish representative. I'm looking for someone to take over my spot one of these days. Um, but it's interesting, and of course, so why does this remind me of it? The idea that Catholics are inviting dialogue, right, of a religious nature from non-Christian, but through the prism of the church, right? So it's like one of the members of the tradition is in this quarterly meeting that somebody's invited to give a benediction to start the meeting, a prayer, and of course the by state law they used to, they don't really do it anymore, but they used to make a proviso before the prayer that it was meant to be a sort of a non-denominational prayer, right? In recognition, like thanking God, but a non-denominational, like we respect all religions, and this is just going to be one example of sort of a non-denominational prayer. And 9 times out of 10, they'll get up there and start very nicely, and in Jesus' name we pray. Let us all say Amen, right? Because they can't, right? And what salvation would say is that's okay, because that's their faith, right? Again, it's not so okay that they think that like sort of they're being inclusive when they're not. That's not so okay. But the idea that they take it seriously, that it's part and parcel of everything they do, right? That they can't really imagine what a non-denominational prayer looks like. The Rav doesn't have a problem with that, because that's how Jews should be, right? It should be so ingrained in who we are and what we are that, okay, maybe we should be able to offer by the way, when they ask me to do it, I do a much better job, because I can compartmentalize, and I remember what the Rav taught me through his works, right? So I do it and do not mention Jesus, but everyone else sort of slips into it, and that speaks to the challenge that existed in the last paragraph of it. And I give you the whole thing. As the sacred synod searches into the mystery of the church, it remembers the bond that spiritually ties the people of the new covenant to Abraham's stock, right? The idea of the new covenant, of course, is that when the Jewish people rejected Jesus, the Jewish people were rejected by God. And although we might be the trunk, the branches that grew and that are alive today are part of the new covenant, namely Christianity. So, it's even as they're, inviting the Jewish community to collaborate, they're sticking it to us by reminding us that, they're the new covenant and we're not. But again, that may not be the problem. They talk about the shared heritage and the shared past, and just point out, look at the last paragraph. True, the Jewish authorities and those who follow their lead press for the death of Christ. Right? We're Christ killers. That's one of the major indictments against us. Still, what happened in his passion cannot be charged against all Jews without distinction then alive, nor against the Jews of today. Right? So in other words, part of the Vatican II, the Nostra Aetate, which it's known as, it was meant to put into a different perspective the 2,000 years of Jewish persecution surrounding the deicide claim, right? That we killed their God. And just to turn to the next page, on the top we see the church reproves as foreign to the mind of Christ any discrimination against man or harassment of them because of their race, color, condition of life, or religion. Very nice. Where were you 2,000 years, right? Like, but better late than never. That's a wonderful statement for sure. But this idea of, and remember, one of the sensitivities surrounding interfaith dialogue can and should be the fact that as a stated goal of Christianity and of Islam, but we're going to take it from the Christian perspective, is proselytizing, is turning Jews Christian, to accept the living covenant, the new covenant, right? I hope nobody splices my video and takes it out of context. But this idea, right? So that's a very sensitive topic. Jews never proselytize, right? Our perspective is that we do what we do. You like what we're doing, we're gonna, you don't really want to be Jewish. You want to be Jewish, fine. There's a conversion process. We're not out there proselytizing. We want you to be. We are a light unto the nations. We want you to be the best non-Jew you can be through the 7 Noahide laws, through living a moral, ethical, upstanding life. We want to be models for that, and we want the whole world to follow suit. right? We want everyone to be monotheists, to believe in one God. That's what we believe in, but not everyone has to be Jewish, right? You don't have to accept Judaism in order to go to heaven, which is that major difference between Judaism and the other two monotheistic Abrahamic religions, faiths, is that they believe everybody has to be their faith in order to get to heaven. So this is what's going on in the 1960s. This is what's going on in this was passed in 1965. And just to give you a sense of the response, if you look on the second page, and it's amazing, because when this statement was finalized, look at the date, February 5th, 1964. Today, 61, is that right? Yeah, 61 years ago today. Just kind of worked out that way. So this was the statement adopted by the Rabbinical Council of America at its Woodminster Conference in February of 1964, right? We are pleased to note that in recent years there has, and by the way, why is this important? Because the Rabbinical Council of America sent the question to Rav Soloveitchik, who was the head of their Vad Halacha, their Halacha committee, and this is what came out of that with his approval. Before we get to there, let me share with you this statement that's on the bottom is an addendum to an article found in Tradition, which is the journal of the Rabbinical Council of America from 1964, summer of 1964, where Rav Soloveitchik published an article entitled "Confrontations." Confrontations is the Rav's theological underpinnings to his opinion that's expressed in this statement from the Rabbinical Council of America. Again, this was before the final version of the Declaration of Nostra Aetate was published, but it was well on its way. The Vatican II was a process that went on for a number of months, if not years, and so this was in the hopper. And this is what Rav Soloveitchik points out, and I want to share with you. You're welcome. It's available online. I can send you the link to the entire essay. Those of us who learned the Rav's essays last year often wish that someone would just summarize it for them, because the language can be challenging, and the idea, sometimes the writing is a little bit academic, and you can tell that he's sort of thinking in German philosophy and writing in English. But this is what he says. He points out that human beings, in the creation story, human beings come on the scene on three different levels. On the first level, they're living organisms like every other living organism, like animals, like penguins and deer and rabbits. They're human beings. Rav Soloveitchik calls that a non-confronted person. In other words, they live simple, natural lives. They're completely egocentric, just like animals, right? They do what they feel like they need to do or want to do. No boundaries, no sort of awareness of anything beyond their natural habitat and their natural desires. So too, human beings are, on one level, are created in that way: egocentric, hedonistic, right? Completely in sync with nature and nothing else. What he calls non-confronted. In other words, they're not confronted with anything beyond their natural needs, their natural desires. He says on another level, human beings are contemplative beings, right? We have an awareness beyond ourselves, right? We abstract thought, right? These are things that other animals in nature don't have, and on that level, human beings can see beyond themselves. They see that there's something bigger out there, right? Sometimes they can identify it and name it. Sometimes they can't. They feel that they are being challenged, right? They're no longer the same as all the other animals of the animal kingdom. There's something that sets them apart. There's a power, there's a being, there's a spirit, whatever you want to call it, that challenges us, that limits us, that confronts us. That's the confrontation. That's one type of confrontation, right? The idea that we have potential and we have to live up to that potential. Right? That's a challenge, right? It just doesn't happen. It's a decision. Right? Decision making is also part of that higher order thinking that most animals don't have. It's all instinctive. We're not meant to be completely instinctive. We're meant to understand that if we transcend our instincts, we can accomplish even more than what may be, quote unquote, naturally available to us. Once we realize that, right, so we have choices to make, right? And the question is, right, in this more complicated, quote unquote, confronted life, what are we going to be in that? Are we going to be subjects or objects? We had this last year in some of the essays, especially with halachic man. Are we going to be active? Are we going to push against the challenge? Are we going to try to fulfill our potential by transcending our instincts? Or are we going to be objects? We're going to be, whatever happens to us, happens to us. We're going to be resigned to the fate of nature, which will not allow us to have any sense of accomplishment, but will lead to a sense of despair. Of course, the Torah, religion, Torah specifically, but faith in general, challenges us to be subjects in the drama of our lives. It's not enough just to allow nature to take its course. No, nature takes its course, but we have to be active participants in the drama, actors in the drama of our lives. And Rav Soloveitchik says, if you look at the Bereshit story in Genesis, this begins to happen when Hashem brings the animals to Adam, and Adam is called upon to name each of the animals. That separates him from the animal world and demonstrates his dominion over the rest of that nature, right? That shows that's a moment in which Adam begins to realize that he's challenged by Hashem. He rules over the basic nature, and he's challenged by Hashem to feel confronted, to feel that he has choices and that he has to make good decisions. So that's one confrontation we have with what we call God, right? The confrontation to be moral, to be more than what nature presents as the opportunities. And a second level of confrontation is what he calls reciprocal confrontation. That's when Adam meets Chava, right? And you have two human beings, people on the same sort of level of the food pyramid, right? Where they are engaging with one another to create community. And as Rav Soloveitchik points out in the essay, community can't happen without the word that's very similar to community, which is communication. You have to have communication in order to create relationships and community. And this happens when Adam names and speaks to Chava. And as that verbal, he points out that Rav Soloveitchik makes this great point that the more people get to know each other, the more they realize that they are individuals and unique, right? He puts it this way. He says that on the one hand, you get to know another person and you see the commonalities. But just as much as you see the commonalities, you also see the ways in which you're different, and you're always going to be different, and you're never going to be the same, right? And the Rav says that as Chava was being engaged, communicated with by Adam, she was both assured and troubled by Adam's words. She was assured that, there's another human being, but she was troubled by the fact that we're very different. Men and women, husbands and wives, right? After years and years, over time, you begin to realize, the relationship deepens, the love deepens, but the realization that we are very different people even becomes more and more evident. And as the Rav puts it in his way, every person lives on these two planes. On the one hand, when we have friends and spouses and loved ones in our life, we live in a community of people that we feel connected to, but at the same time, we're also, each of us is alone, right? There's an extent to which there's a point where commonality is no longer there. And on an essential level, as the Talmud says, Adam Nivra Yechidi, people, we're not cogs in a machine. We're not all interchangeable. Each one of us is unique. When God made you, afterwards he broke the mold, right? And as a result, there's lots of things that are in common one with the other, but there's a certain essence that's unique, that's not like anyone else. You begin to see the sort of the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of what Rav Soloveitchik is going to say as it relates to faith communities, right? Just as human beings on some level can engage with one another, can cooperate with one another, can feel connected and interdependent one with the other, but on a fundamental sort of axiological, existential level, they have to remain. There's a uniqueness, right, that never gets, that never can and never will be lost. So too, you can imagine that when it comes to religions, different faith communities, there are ways in which all faiths are the same, and there's an essential level in which every faith, including and especially Judaism, is going to be alone, separate, distinct, in ways in which there can never be communication through that uniqueness. Right? That's the expression of ezer and kenegdo. On the one hand, spouses are supposed to help one another, right? When it comes to common causes, common values, common garbage that needs to be taken out, right? We're ezer, we help one another. But on a certain sort of fundamental level and on an essential level, there's a kenegdo. There's always going to be that distance, right? And it's not bad. It just is. That's what it means to be human and to have this awareness. We're not part of a herd, right? We're not, the Migdal Bavel was wrong. We're not just bringing bricks to build a tower, and if you die, when you fall down, we're sad that the brick broke, not that the fact that the person died, right? That was Migdal Bavel. That Rav Soloveitchik pointed out. That's communism, right? The people don't matter; it's the cause that matters. We don't believe that. We believe in the essential uniqueness and holiness of every individual, and that's that's what we that's the idea of kenegdo. There's always this space, this distance that exists. So we're confronted by Hashem, by God, on an individual level, and we're confronted. The second confrontation is as we relate to others. And he points out, taking it from the personal, from the individual to the religion. The Rav pointed out that Jews are dealt with a double confrontation, right? On the one hand, we are human beings. We share the destiny of all human beings, and in that way, we can be ezer. We can help. We suffer from the malaise, from the maladies of the world. Also, when there's a pandemic, we also suffer. When there's a stock market crash, we also suffer. Whatever the case may be, we share the destiny of all of humanity, but we also uniquely part of a unique covenantal community, right? Our relationship with Hashem, as we are told, makes us unique. We're told, like Bilam said, "Hein am levadad yishkon." We are a nation that dwells alone, right? No matter how, right? You can even say that about, right? I'll take it in a direction that the Rav doesn't say. We were talking about Israel. On some level, we are fortunate when the state of Israel is in a time and a place and a circumstance when they have lots of allies, when we have lots of friends, when there's a common, right? There's a common cause, right? High tech. All of a sudden, there's people want to make peace with the little state of Israel, right? Because there's a common that's on one level, and the Rav Soloveitchik would say that's great. But on a certain essential level, we can never lose sight of the fact that Israel, just like the Jewish people, stands alone, right? And so it's this combination. There's the universal human confrontation where we can interface, we can dialogue, we can confront with other people, other faiths, other nations, and then there's the exclusive confrontation that we have as the Jewish people, which is unique to our experience. And so, and whereas lots of people in the 60s were suggesting that you have to choose between one or the other, right? You can engage in the world as a human being, or you can, right, and share in the plight of the rest of humanity, or you can be insular and focus exclusively on your Jewish identity. And the Rav says that's not the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to engage and be confronted on both levels. In one level, we can share in the challenges and opportunities that the world has with other faiths, and in some ways, we have to do it on their own. And of course, this comes from a basic feeling that we have to take religion seriously, right? And therefore, just as our religion is unique and should not be watered down or changed as a result of our working with other people, so too the same should be said about their faiths as well. And so you see, if we go back now to, because I want to wrap up this first part now, if we go back to the statement on this is page 2 of the handout, statement from the Rabbinical Council of America is predicated on sort of 4 basic principles, rules that are Soloveitchik shared in confrontations about engaging with dialoguing with other faiths. He said, number 1, that Judaism is a totally independent faith community. Number 2, that dialogue should not occur on a theological level, right? You shouldn't learn the Old Testament with, clergy of other faiths, right? It should, another point that Soloveitchik made, because the change in the liturgy by the Pope already happened in 1959. Soloveitchik said, if the church decides to change its liturgy, then gesundheit hate. Well, I don't think he said that, but that's what he meant, right? Let him do it. But we shouldn't be saying, hey, why are you saying this? That's not so nice to the Jews. No, they should do religion is a serious business. What they decide they should do. If it's good for the church to change, and that's within their right and within their ability. But we shouldn't be pushing that agenda, and avoid matters of fundamental faith. So if you look at the statement from 1964, we are pleased to note that in recent years, there has evolved in our country as well as throughout the world a desire to seek better understanding, mutual respect among the world's major faiths. Again, there's a big Holocaust underlying theme here. Where was religion during the Holocaust? Major failure, etc. The current threat of secularism and materialism and the modern atheistic negation of religion and religious values makes even more imperative a harmonious relationship among the faiths. That's something that all faiths are against, right? Atheism, secularism, materialism. This relationship, however, can only be of value if it will not be in conflict with the uniqueness of each religious community, since each religious community is an individual entity which cannot be merged or equated with a community which is committed to a different faith. Right? Everybody has to stand their uniqueness. Each religious community is endowed with intrinsic dignity and metaphysical worth. It's a very Rav Kookian idea, right? That it's not just that religions have a worth. They're along a trajectory of spiritual history, leading to a destiny of ultimately, everyone recognizing Hashem. But it's every historical experience, its present dynamics, its hopes and aspirations for the future can only be interpreted in terms of full spiritual independence of and freedom from any relatedness to another faith community. Any suggestion that the historical and meta-historical worth of a faith community be viewed against the backdrop of another faith, for instance, that Christianity is the Judeo-Christian, right? This idea that Christianity supersedes, takes the place of the chosen people, and Judaism has been rejected. That's a problem, right? Is incongruous with the fundamentals of religious liberty and freedom of conscience that can only breed discord and suspicion. Such an approach is unacceptable to any self-respecting faith community that is proud of its past, vibrant and active in the present, and determined to live on in the future and to continue serving God in its own individual way. Right? It's only right. So where is there room for cooperation, collaboration, crime, child protection, right? In lots of the ways, like I'm just thinking about the areas that the faith-based initiative of the state of Florida. What are the areas? They deal with families. They deal with safety. They deal with homelessness, right? Addiction, right? These are things that we can all, right? We can all approach it and value it from our unique religious perspective without dealing with the theological differences between us, right? So that's a very and if you see if you turn to page 3 in the handout, the second page, you'll see that there's a letter here from 1967 just reconfirming this idea. I'm just going to read the first paragraph, written to the president of the Rabbinical Council of America at the time. We reconfirm our previous guidelines that any dialogue, debate, or symposium on dogmatic and theological subjects is not only futile, but damaging as well to the best interests of the religious communities involved in such a debate. It would only result in an attempt, conscious or unconscious, of one community to impose its theology upon the other. Again, because we're the community of the few, we're very sensitive to being dictated to, right? Therefore, we appeal to all segments of the Jewish community, regardless of their diverse philosophies, to refrain from discussing theological problems which will only cause embarrassment, right? But we nonetheless, right, that we assert as loyal citizens of our great country, we are all Jew and non-Jew alike interested in the welfare of our people and their material as well as spiritual and moral advancement. It is desirable that full cooperation and coordination of efforts in the fields of social legislation and ideology be furthered and promoted, right? There's a whole area of the human experience, right? Let's talk about, like, as it relates to the guf, gashmias, right? The material, safety and security, which is also a spiritual value, that we should collaborate, cooperate, even though we approach child safety, we approach addiction, we approach, intact families from our unique Jewish perspective, and they do it from their unique Catholic perspective. Nonetheless, there's a common ground. We're not dealing with fundamental principles of our faith. We're not asking us to discuss them. We're just asking, what can we do? Right? We're not dialoguing. We are joining hands to act in a way that will hopefully improve the situation. So that's in a nutshell the Rav on interfaith dialogue, that we have to retain and our unique faith perspective, but as it relates to the neshama, I would say, as it relates to the guf, as it relates to the body, the social and cultural and political things, we can certainly collaborate and cooperate and work together in a similar way, but in a different format, right? Because the Rav talked about the different confrontations of Adam Harishon. So Rav Soloveitchik, in a similar way, deals with this in the question of interdenominational cooperation. Now, again, this came up in 1950. Just to give a little of the history, in 1954, Rav Soloveitchik was asked if it was okay for Orthodox rabbis to unite and collaborate with non-Orthodox counterparts. At the time, it was very popular for there to be a board of rabbis that included rabbis of all different streams of Judaism. There was even talk of having joint batei din with rabbis of conservative and Orthodox congregations that would work together for matters of Jewish identity, conversion, divorce, etc. And of course, this is in the 1950s, where conservative Judaism was on the ascendance, and Orthodox Judaism was very much feeling like the community of the few. Just like Rav Soloveitchik said, the Jews are the community of the few in relationship to the world religions. Orthodox Judaism in 1954 certainly felt like the community of the few in regards to the total Jewish, American Jewish scene. So this was the question that was asked, and Rav Soloveitchik gave his answer in a column in the Yiddish Daily, the Tug Morgan Journal, and some of that, if you turn to the next page in the handout, you'll see some of it. It gives that introduction and gives the question that he answered, right? But before we get to that, and we're not going to be able to read that inside, so I'm going to give it to you. But this is the background. This is a summation of that article that was now again in the volume of correspondence and letters that Rav Soloveitchik wrote to a number of different people and a number of different places. So he points out that just like unity and separation exists within humanity, that the Rav just said is that's why it's nice to do both of these topics together, because sort of the fundamentals are similar, but the psukim are different. Just like there's unity and separation, that it coexists within the human experience, so too, it's a basic principle of Judaism that the Jewish people are considered to be goy achad, right? One nation, right? There's unity, achdut, right? And Rav Soloveitchik says this unity manifests itself in two ways. One of the ways is the unity of the spiritual community, of a common religion, a common religious practice, right? A Jewish lifestyle, halachic lifestyle, right? That's a commonality. This is the commonality that was thrust upon the Jewish people at Har Sinai. Right? We all stood there. We all were given the 10 Commandments, all the entire Torah. We were all committed to a similar lifestyle, way of life, perspective on religion and faith. And not just what we think, but what we do, right? The Rav says that that's the community as referred to as Eidah. Eidah related to the word aid, witness. We are all witnesses to the revelation at Sinai, and we're all committed as witnesses to that. We all commit ourselves to living a similar halachic, Torah-infused, mitzvah-heavy lifestyle. That's one unity of the Jewish people, right? The other unity of the Jewish people is based not on Har Sinai, but earlier. We're joking around about Pesach. It's the unity that the Jewish people experience as a result of the Exodus from Egypt. One of the expressions of redemption that Hashem tells Moshe to say is "Lakachti li la'am," that you will be for me an am, a nation. But Soloveitchik says that this idea of an am is a unity. But remember, this was a unity of a nation that has yet to been obligated in the Torah. It's not a unity that comes as a result of a shared lifestyle, of a shared commitment to halacha, but rather it's a unity that comes from a shared historical experience, right? All the Jews were subject to the oppression of Egypt and the slavery of Egypt. All Jews had a common fate. All Jews had had the same redemption, right? It has nothing to do with their level of observance or what they thought. It's how they were all grouped together. They were all treated in the same way. Every Jew was included in that, right? And that, just like that comes from the word am, is related to the word im. It's the same word, with. We're all in it together, right? This is the famous idea, right? And again, because you can't think of this theology without the context of the Holocaust, right? And they didn't check people's level of observance in the concentration camps. Right, that the atheist and the pious one both ended up in the crematorium. Right, this is the idea of the common fate, the common historical experience, the fact that we were treated the same way. Right, the anti-Semite doesn't care how observant you are. Right, you're Jewish, and that's all that matters. So the Soloveitchik says that the Jewish unity, Jewish identity, is an amalgam of these two unities. Right? The unity of Eidah, of shared religious, halachic, Torah, mitzvos lifestyle, that is eroded from within. In other words, it's up to us. To what extent is there a cohesion among, Jews in terms of their observance, in terms of their lifestyle, in terms of their values? That's eroded from within. Right? The extent to which we are a unified Eidah, the way that we practice and observe and relate to halacha, right? And by the way, I just want to make a point that throughout history, there's always been people that were observant or more observant and less observant. What's sort of new since the emancipation in the last 200 or so years is streams of religious thought that justified or that celebrated different forms of Judaism that didn't include observance of Torah mitzvahs, right? So, like, think about in other even today, right? You think about much of the Sephardic community and the Mizrahi people from Jews of Arab lands. There are Jews that go to that are observant, and there are Jews in those communities that don't keep Shabbat, but they all go to the same shul. Right? There's no reform. There's no right. They're all basically, certainly, not originally. They were less observant, more observant, all part of the same faith community. So it's not really. It's not just what we do, but what we believe and how we view ourselves as bound by the Sinai experience of Torah mitzvos. That can be eroded only from within, as opposed to the unity of Am, right? We all have a common fate. We're all in it together. That is threatened from without, right? That comes from the outside world sort of directing itself against us. And so obviously what we're going to see is that the Rav differentiates between these two elements of our Jewish identity, right? As it relates to Eidah, right? There's no compromise. If you're part of the Eidah, if you're part of the halachic community, then we speak the same language. We're part of the same collaboration, right? And if you're not part of that Eidah, then it'd be very difficult for us to engage in matters of religion because we don't speak the same language. We don't have the same values, right? But as it relates to as it relates to without, to have a common, right, to create a common front, right, as it relates to interacting with the government, the White House, Congress, right, to combat anti-Semitism, right? That's our shared identity, our unity as an and there's plenty of room that's encouraged for there to be collaboration and cooperation, right? The Rav, even as he sort of lamented the breakdown to some degree in the 1950s, already started 100 years before that, of the unity of the Eidah, right? That there were people that were not committed to the same halachic values and principles as those in the Orthodox community. He was very staunchly in favor of not giving up on the notion of right? And that there are these ways in which we all have to come together and work together. And so that's what he says. That's basically what how he deals with it. The in the 1950s, there was a question raised to the Vad Halacha of the RCA about the Synagogue Council of America. Synagogue Council of America was an organization created in 1926 by a consortium of Orthodox, conservative, and Reform organizations that was formed to represent Jewish interests to the outside world. Very much in line with the Rav Soloveitchik's idea that needs to come together in order to protect the interests of the common interests and create a common front. What's interesting about the Synagogue Council of America was that the Orthodox could veto any action that any of the organizations wanted to have. The Orthodox could veto it on the grounds that they perceived it as being of religious nature, right? So they didn't have to vote against the actual cause. All they could say is, well, we feel that this is a little too religious, and the Synagogue Council of America doesn't deal with religious issues. So the degree to which it was effective as an internal mechanism was, zilch, right? Hit and miss, lots of misses, right? Exactly. So in 1956, some RCA rabbis questioned whether the Rabbinical Council of America, the Orthodox umbrella of Orthodox rabbis in America, should be part of the Synagogue Council of America. It was to talk about sort of the right wing of Orthodox rabbis at the time had some questions, and they wanted to present this question to the Vad Halacha to whether or not it's appropriate for the RCA to continue to be part of this Synagogue Council of America. Days before the meeting, right? There's always interesting intrigue. So days before the meeting that was to consider this question, a different organization of rabbis in America, the Rabbinical Alliance of America, issued a ban against the Synagogue Council of America and participating in it, and any joint rabbinical boards that Orthodox rabbis could not be a part of. So as a result of that, and you'll see it in the as a result of that, the Vad Halacha never formally ruled on the question. They felt that it was too political. In fact, if you look at the last page, do you have that? The letter to Rabbi Solomon Sharfman, June 11th, 1957. See that? I think that's the last page, right? No, it's the second to last page. Right. Page number 4. Yeah. So that's where he says, last year we sent a note to the Conference of the Rabbinical Council of America in which we requested the officers of the organization to remove the problem of the RCA's relationship to the Synagogue Council from the agenda of the conference and resubmit it to the Halacha Commission for further study. They didn't want to touch it while it was sort of a political. It was a hot potato and they were afraid that they wouldn't deal with it on its merits. They would deal with it based on the noise. We feel that this issue affecting the future course and program of the RCA was too grave to be debated in an atmosphere charged with partisanship and emotion, and that only a common and impartial study could resolve it, because the Rabbinical Alliance ruled, days before it was meant to be discussed. A year has passed since then. The RCA is about to assemble for its annual convention. Its membership is most probably anticipating, and rightfully so, instructions from the Halacha Commission with regard to the above-mentioned problem. Should I sit on the local board of rabbis? Should I not? However, we regret exceedingly to inform you that the Halacha Commission is not yet ready to issue a statement or chart a new course of action, since many relevant aspects have not been clarified and further scrutiny is essential. Right? In keeping with our promise that we would not render a decision until inquiry be complete, data carefully assembled and analyzed, and the problem placed in its proper perspective, we were compelled to ask the conference to bear with us until such time as we shall be able to submit our report with a clear conscience. This was 1957. The issue was never resolved or actually dealt with by the Vad Halacha. And Rav Soloveitchik dies in 1993, with the Rabbinical Council of America still part of the Synagogue Council of America, probably mostly because they didn't want to go against, right? The Rav never pulled out. So they wanted Rav Soloveitchik had been absent from the public arena for almost 10 years before his death. And nonetheless, they remained as part of it. It happens to be that in 1994, the RCA and the OU left the Synagogue Council of America, and soon thereafter it folded, having not much of a history of much accomplishment, right, for the almost 70 years that it existed, right? And why is that, right? The Rav never formally ruled on the petition. Knowing what we know, it's probably because, although he was adamant and he was strongly, railed against the non-Orthodox movements that created changes that made sort of the halachic tradition, religious, spiritual community begin to splinter, right? It wasn't all one. Rav Soloveitchik was involved in an effort to create batei din for purposes of conversion and divorce that would be acceptable to both the modern Orthodox and conservative Jewish communities, because he felt so strongly that let's have a common language as it relates to ritual, as it relates to religion. Of course, in the early 80s, when the Reform movement said Jews are identified as Jews with patrilineal descent, so that was the end of that. Already in the 50s, the Rav felt that there was not a common language as it relates to the Reform movement. As it relates to the conservative movement, he said there's a difference between what they profess and what the reality is, right? So they profess to have an allegiance to halacha and tradition, and yet some of their statements, some of their process and decisions bring that into question, right? Most famously, the drive to shul psak, which raises serious questions about their fealty and commitment to the halachic process as it had been known, for thousands of years before that. So so on the level of Eidah, already in the 50s, the community had splintered, but he was not willing to give up on the unity that should and can be encompassed through the Am. So he wanted the Synagogue Council of America to exist because in the way he presented things, we need to have a common front as it relates to the outside world, as the way in which there is this commonality, the covenant of fate, the idea that we're all in it together, right? That remains. The question is whether that really was the case in the 90s, and whether that's really the case today, right? The forces have and continue to certainly pull us apart. The Jewish world of the 1950s was much smaller and united than it is today. The decrease in Jewish literacy and the emphasis in other parts of the non-Orthodox community towards more social justice causes has led to a real degrading of the notion of Eidah, of what makes the Jewish identity unique as it relates to the Sinai revelation, and major changes in broader society and culture. Some of the culture wars that didn't exist during, Leave It to Beaver's time are now front and center, and people have made choices, even denominations have made choices in terms of where do you fit within the interface with modernity, right? Do you embrace it as a value and fit Judaism, Jewish tradition to fit with the times, or do you make the times fit with Jewish tradition? That's been a major difference in the second half of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century. So the Rav's the Rav very much believed and was committed to this idea of Am, even though as he was staunchly defensive and protective of the Edah, of the halachic community, what we call Orthodox, traditional, however you want to call it. He was staunchly and willing to do quote unquote battle with elements of the Jewish community that were not committed to the same religious values that he understood to be part of the Edah. At the same time, he was fiercely protective of the unity of the Jewish people as it relates to the Am. And sort of these. There's a question. With this will end. There's a question about today, 30 years later after the Rav died, right? So are these categories still relevant? Certainly, there was a period of time, 20 years ago, people would say it's not so relevant. Forget about 20 years ago, 2 years ago, people would say this idea of an Am having a common face in order to protect ourselves from the outside forces. You'd be like, what do you mean? America's the best place in the world. Israel's a safe place. What do we need that Am? Nobody questions the need for Am post October 7th. And even the idea of sort of the protection that the protective stance that Rav Soloveitchik had, both in terms of his feeling of being a community of the few in relationship to Christianity, led him to say, let's avoid theological debates. That makes sense. But he seems to carry that over as it relates to his understanding of the traditional community, the faith community of the Orthodox community in the 1950s and 60s, of being the community of the few, and therefore can only lose if they were to dialogue or engage with the broader non-Orthodox community. And you have to ask yourself, is that really true? Is that what we see today? The Orthodox community is still a minority, and yet there's a tremendous amount of interest. The October 8th Jew, even the non-Orthodox, in the aftermath of October 7th, want to know, what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean? What's unique about it? They are exploring what certainly they feel very strongly, and the Orthodox community also should too, this idea of Am, the need to have a common front against an enemy. And we know there's enemies out there now in ways that we probably didn't remember 2 years ago. So on the one hand, the Orthodox community is strengthening our realization of the importance of Am, and the non-Orthodox community post-September, October 7th, is inching, exploring, curious about the faith community, about Edah, right? Well, I've mentioned it before, and I'll mention it here. We are exploring ways in which we encourage our membership to reach out there. Everyone has a cousin or a neighbor or a friend or a coworker that is Jewish, that has talked about October 7th, that is searching, that is interested in Jewish literacy, in Jewish learning, in Jewish ritual and practice. And we are thinking about ways in which we can encourage our members to be those ambassadors, because in that way, we may be the community of the few still, but in relationship to the broader community, now that Am realization is that much more strong, there seems to be a real opportunity to strengthen the connections, even of people of disparate observance levels and perspectives, but to create some sort of line that connects us all, not only as an Am, but also as an Edah. It's still very early. Still, the war is still going on. The hostages are still there. It's not over, but there may be an opportunity there to strengthen both these things. Certainly Am has been strengthened, but also maybe there's an opportunity for Edah to be strengthened as well. So the extent to which the philosophical, the theological, the Torah underpinnings from Bereshit, for Adam, for the different confrontations, from Shemos, as it relates to the different ways in which the Jewish people are united at Sinai, united in the fate and the oppression of Egypt. Those are powerful and remain true. Sort of the the lessons learned as a result to a specific historical moment, latter part of the 20th century versus where we are today, is something that certainly can be debated. What would the Rav have said today? You know, it's a fun topic to think about, but probably more importantly is how do we use what the Rav has given us that's timeless in a way that speaks to us and to the challenges that we face today. Thank you all very much. Thank you for those on the.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was